Hi, my name is Dr. Sam Poyser, and I am an academic here at Aberystwyth University. I've been researching miscarriages of justice or wrongful convictions for about 20 years now, and I've been teaching for just as long. At Aberystwyth University, I run a module at undergraduate level. So for those just coming into university, called Wrongful Convictions. And we talk a lot about miscarriages of justice in that module. And I also run a module at postgraduate level. So let's say you completed a criminology degree at Aberystwyth University and you undertook wrongful convictions and you really enjoyed it, then you might want to come to our postgraduate degree, our Masters in Criminology, and continue studying miscarriages of justice. And I offer a module at that level for you to study as well. So you can enjoy lots of studying around miscarriages of justice with me at Aberystwyth. I look at miscarriages of justice from a criminological perspective, not a legal perspective. And that's partly because I'm a criminologist, not a lawyer, and they're two very different disciplines, but also because of a number of other issues, which I'm going to talk to you about now. So if we look at miscarriages of justice from a legal perspective, okay, we could say that in trying to define them, a miscarriage of justice only occurs when the Court of Appeal overturns or quashes a conviction. Okay, so that sounds quite complicated, perhaps. The Court of Appeal is a court in England and Wales which deals with individuals who claim to have been wrongly convicted. Okay, but it only does so on a very narrow range of reasons. Okay, the two most important ones being that you can overturn your conviction, you can quash your conviction. Okay, and for example, if you're in prison, you've been convicted of murder, you didn't do it, you will appeal to the Court of Appeal, but you can only do so on the grounds of fresh evidence or on the grounds that something went wrong at trial. So maybe the judge misdirected the jury, that sort of thing. These are considered to be very narrow grounds. Okay, so you can see that the Court of Appeal has rules, if you like, very strict rules on which cases it will consider in that respect. Okay, well, that's the legal position. So that means that we only define a miscarriage of justice if a conviction is quashed or overturned by the Court of Appeal. There are some problems with that. I've told you about the narrow number of reasons which you might be able, based on which you might be able to get your conviction overturned. Okay, but the criminal justice system is run by human beings, isn't it? And so is the appellate system, so the Court of Appeal. Okay, and so those sitting in the Court of Appeal, senior judges making those decisions about whether to overturn a conviction or not, can make mistakes. Yeah, they can fail to rectify a wrongful conviction, in other words. So you could have a position, couldn't you, where, as I say, somebody has been wrongly convicted of, let's say, a serious crime such as murder. They've been sent to prison for a very long time. And as I said, wrongfully convicted. In this case, let's say they were innocent, therefore, and yet they've appealed to the Court of Appeal and they're unable to have their conviction overturned. You have the situation where somebody is innocent and in prison and unable to essentially get out, okay, before, let's say, the 20-year tariff that they've been given, the 20-year sentence that they've been given. That's a very problematic position. But what I will say to you is that a lawyer would say, well, perhaps would say, well, that's not a miscarriage of justice because the Court of Appeal hasn't overturned the conviction. Okay. A criminological position is different to that. It basically says, look, we know that the criminal justice system is run by human beings, that the appellate system is run by human beings, and we know, therefore, that they will make those mistakes. They will fail to recognise and to rectify some miscarriages of justice, some wrongful conviction. It recognises that there must be miscarriages of justice that are never revealed. People who spend the whole of their tariff, maybe 20 years in prison before they reach the end of that sentence and are released. And they never have that conviction quashed. And remember, they've lost 20 years of freedom, essentially, wrongly. Okay, the criminal justice system has done them wrong in that respect. But that will never be recognised officially as a wrongful conviction, never be recognised in law as a miscarriage of justice. So that's why we approach this issue from a criminological position. We also do so because, you know, miscarriages of justice aren't just about wrongful convictions. They aren't just about that person who's been wrongly convicted of murder and is sitting in prison for so many years. Okay. They're also about all sorts of other ways in which justice can go wrong, justice can fail. Okay. A miscarriage of justice quite basically can mean a failure to reach the desired end of justice. Our desired goal is justice. Otherwise, why have the criminal justice system? A miscarriage of justice can mean just a failure to reach that goal, a failure to reach justice. And so you can see how that doesn't just include wrongful convictions from a chronological position. It can include all sorts of other failures to achieve justice. So, for example, inappropriate stop and searches on the streets. Yeah, just one example. We'll look at others if you join me in the longer session. And I just want to give you some real life examples, really, of people who can be considered to have been miscarriages of justice or to have suffered a miscarriage of justice, but it wasn't recognised by the Court of Appeal for many, many years. You see these people here, they're looking very happy. The first picture you see is of Sam Hallam. Okay, he was in prison 7 years. He received a long sentence for murder. Okay, but he claimed to have been wrongly convicted from the start. But it took 7 years for him to have his conviction overturned. So he lost 7 years of freedom. And the Birmingham 6, a much older case. The Sam Hallam case is relatively recent, but the Birmingham 6 is a much older case. 6 men who were wrongly convicted of terrorist offences in the 1970s. They spent 16 years in prison before their conviction was overturned. In other words, recognised and rectified by the Court of Appeal. These were both miscarriages of justice from the moment these people were convicted at trial. But it took a very long time, didn't it, for the legal system to recognise them as being miscarriages of justice. So hopefully now you've got a really good idea of why, as a criminologist, I take the particular approach to this topic that I do. And these are some other examples that you might want to go away and have a look at, because if you go onto the internet and simply Google the name Stefan Kisko, you will see what happened in the Stefan Kisko case. He was wrongly convicted of murder of a little girl many years ago, and he waited 16 years in prison before his conviction was finally recognised and rectified by the Court of Appeal. And Stephen Downing, one of our longest suffering victims of miscarriages of justice, he was wrongly convicted of murder in the 1970s, and he spent 27 years in prison before the Court of Appeal recognised and rectified his wrongful conviction. Okay, I just want to pause for a few seconds there for you to think about what that might be like to have lost probably a third of your life, maybe more than that, a third of your life to prison, to sitting in a prison, and you shouldn't be there. Okay, 27 years. Okay. If you'd like to do some research about one of the most widespread miscarriages of justice in the world, let alone in British history, then just go onto the internet and have a look at the British Post Office scandal. Now, that doesn't sound as exciting as I've made it sound, but if you have a look at that, you will see that this is a miscarriage of justice that has only recently been revealed, very, very recently, involving the wrongful conviction of many sub-postmasters. In other words, people who essentially are in charge of regional or local, if you like, post offices that you might go into to, I don't know, buy a stamp or do a little bit of banking. Okay, so those people, the case of those people who had been wrongly convicted of theft, of false accounting, and or fraud. Some of them went to prison for that, some of them didn't, but nevertheless they received a punishment, and that changed their lives, ruined their lives. These cases spanned a period of 20 years or so, and many of them remain unresolved, despite the fact that they're all linked. Again, back to my point of many miscarriages of justice not being recognised and rectified by the criminal justice system. You'll see some very interesting information if you have a look at the British Post Office scandal. And if you'd like to know even more about miscarriages of justice, and indeed some of the things that we'll be talking about at length, if you join me for the longer session, then go on to this recently created website here, Evidence-Based Justice at exeter.ac.uk. And it's basically a miscarriages of justice registry that's been set up, a database, if you like, of the names, the faces, and information about hundreds of people in the UK who have suffered a miscarriage of justice directly. Most of these people have been in prison. They have been imprisoned for an offence that they didn't commit. So serious crimes that they've been wrongly convicted for, which carried very lengthy prison sentences. As I say, imagine being in prison for a crime that you did not commit, and then waiting years and years in prison, hoping for your conviction to be recognised and overturned. In other words, to be quashed and then to be released. Now, you might think, well, I agree with you, Sam. That's a terrible situation to be in. But miscarriages of justice don't happen all the time, do they? They're quite rare occurrences. After all, we only read, don't we, about the kind of what we call cause célèbre, the high-profile cases that come to light in the newspapers, on TV even. But actually, that's not the case. A miscarriage of justice is actually very, very, very common in the UK. As Yant said in 1991, he's a scholar of miscarriages of justice, he said, an innocent person in prison is about as rare as a pigeon in the park. Now, we know how common pigeons are in most parks. So that's the point Yant's making. A miscarriage of justice happens every day in the UK. In fact, it happens every day of every week, of every month, of every year. That's quite a sobering point when you think about it. And why? Well, because, as I say, the criminal justice system, not just the courts, but the whole criminal justice system is run by people like you and me. And we all make mistakes, don't we? And there's also some people that work in the criminal justice system who, just like any other job, shouldn't be there really, because they're maybe incompetent or worse, intentionally doing things wrong. Hopefully the latter is a rare thing, but certainly making mistakes is very common. Now, if you decide to join me for the full session on miscarriages of justice, we're going to examine what a miscarriage of justice is. And, we've gone some way to doing that today, so that'll pick up on this sort of short session. We're going to examine something that we haven't looked at today, some of the causes of miscarriages of justice, and you can probably already think of some of those, and I'm going to ask you about your views on that when you join me, or if you join me. And then we're going to think about some of the impacts of miscarriages of justice, and we've again started a little bit on that today, haven't we? Because I've asked you to think for a few seconds about what it might be like to have been wrongly imprisoned for several years. You're innocent, you're in prison. How does that feel? And not just you. How might that make your family feel, for example? Yeah. What might be the impacts of that? So as I say, you'll be asked questions in that session, such as, what do you think a miscarriage of justice is? And as I've hinted to you today, we could adopt a very broad definition of that. You'll be asked questions such as, what factors may have a role in contributing to bringing about a miscarriage of justice? Okay. You might even be asked, what do you think the most common cause of a miscarriage of justice is worldwide? And questions such as, how do you think it would feel to be convicted of a crime you didn't commit? How might you be harmed then by a miscarriage of justice? Okay. So, if you've enjoyed listening to today, if you would like to know more about miscarriages of justice, then please do join me for the full session on the topic when we come together next. Thank you then, and bye-bye.